April 20th, 2026. For Komachi, a Tokyo-based Japanese live streamer active on the Tweetcast platform, it was just another ordinary day. He set out on one of his regular evening walking streams, and on this particular night, chose to broadcast from Ueno Park. Ueno Park is one of Japan's most visited public spaces, renowned for its cherry blossoms during the annual Hanami season, and home to a number of prominent cultural institutions, including the Tokyo National Museum and the National Museum of Nature and Science. But as he was attempting to pass through one of the more dimly lit sections of the park, a stranger began talking to him. Komachi, perhaps intuitively sensing that something was off about this lone individual, kept a noticeable distance between himself and the man. At first, their conversation appears fairly unremarkable, at least to a degree. The man introduces himself as an unemployed homeless man, currently living in Ueno Park. He does most of the talking, while Komachi contributes little beyond the occasional yes, or when asked a question, a brief answer in return. The man speaks about his middle school days, including his involvement in basketball and the school's computer club. Again, the streamer rarely asks a question, yet the man continues speaking, drifting from one topic to the next without interruption. And throughout his rambling, one information gets slipped in.
僕部活はね、中学の頃にバスケ部に入ったんだけど、バスケ部結局ね辞めて、で俺がバスケ部辞めたってわけじゃないんだけど、はい、まあバスケ部辞めたことによって他の男子がねどんどん辞めてって、でそしたらね中学2年生の時にバスケ部が女子バスケ部になっちゃって、しかも俺がバスケ部入った頃はあんまり無名だったんだけど、女子バスケ部になった途端になんかどんどんね有名になっちゃって、シード権取ったりしたのかな。まあそれはどうでもいいんだけど、で俺はねそうね俺中学3年の時にねパソコン部になって、中2の時だったから忘れちゃったな。まあパソコン部に入って、そんでパソコン部の部長になったんだけど、 HTML しか使えなかったんだけど、まあそんな感じでやってたわけだ。俺素人だからあんま大したこと言えないんだけど、30歳って言っておきながら大して人生生きてないんだけど、まあもう受刑者だったということで、まあ 6,7 年間無職、いろいろひっくるめると8年ぐらい無意味だった時間があったんだけど、意味ではないか。
Embedded within the man's rapid torrent of words is a revealing admission. He admits that he was a former prisoner and that he spent roughly 8 years of meaningless time as a result. Before the man could drift into yet another topic of conversation, Komachi finally interjected with a question.
犯罪者なんですか?
To which the man immediately admitted without hesitation. He was not at all reluctant to discuss the details of his crime, and judging from the tone, there was an unsettling hint of pride in his voice, both in the act itself and in the fact that he had ultimately served so little time for it.
でも大したことない。ヤクザとかハングルとかに比べれば全然大したことないよ。
殺人遺棄って何ですか？
母親を殺害して、死体遺棄が1年と殺人が6年。6年。合計6年。本当は俺ね弁護士からも言われたんだけど、そうね12、13年いくだろうねって言われてたんだし、俺も10年以上はいくだろうなと思ったんだけど、6年で済んだね。あれだろうね精神科でもそうだけど国家とか国とかのそうねいろいろ配慮があったのかな。それで刑期6年で済んだんだけど、そこはありがたいのかありがたくないのか分かんねえけど、それでつい先に出てきたわけよ。知ってる。
はいはいはい。お母さんを殺したってことですか?
そう。
Beneath the man's nonchalant tone is a crime of extraordinary gravity. Not only was he admitting to the murder of another person, but to the killing of his very own mother. He explained why he had committed this heinous act.
なんで殺してしまったんですか?
なんで殺した？母親の圧力とか、自分の殺人に対する要求とか、お前酒入ってるからいろいろ言っちゃうんだけど。
はい。
あと国家に対する反逆心、反抗心というか、はい、いろんなものが複合的にあって、結果的に殺しちゃったってことかな。
By this point, Komachi still seemed unable to fully process what he was hearing. The notion that a convicted murderer was standing before him was difficult enough to process. But a cold-blooded killer who had taken the life of his mother with his own two hands, all of it was simply too much for the live streamer to take in at once. Hence, Komachi decided to ask for the man's name so that viewers watching his live stream could fact-check the man's claims in real time.
名前は何ですか？
僕、
はい。
吉岡正也。
吉岡正也。
And sure enough, the details could be verified. A man by the name of Yoshioka Masaya had indeed killed his mother in 2018 in Koshikaya City and left her body abandoned in a bathtub for several months. In 2020, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Given the timing, he would have only recently been released. The smaller details also matched. Court records listed him as 24 years old in 2020, placing him at around 30 years of age today.
今何歳ですか？
今30歳。
By this point, Komachi appeared thoroughly unnerved. As Yoshioka continued speaking, the streamer's responses became increasingly delayed, seemingly as he was still struggling to come to terms with what he had just learned. And as Komachi stopped offering his usual
はい。はい。
バスケ部や
responses, Yoshioka suddenly fell silent. Then, without warning, he began yelling. By this point, Komachi had heard enough. He wanted out. As Yoshioka wrapped up yet another tangent, this time about baseball.
野球そうね、日本の国技みたいなもんだし、アメリカでも有名だし、
はいはい
まあ、
Komachi finally found an opening to leave.
野球やってなんかやりたい目的とかある？
まあちょっといろいろやりたいんですけど、ちょっと今一回ちょっと言っていいですかね。またここ来ます。
Fortunately for the streamer, he was able to walk away from the encounter unharmed.
ありがとうございます。勝ち来い勝ち来い勝ち来い勝ち来い。一回勝ち殺人犯。勝ち吉岡正也。勝ちやばい勝ちやばい勝ちやばい勝ちやばい勝ちやばい勝ちちょっと勝ちで怖いじゃん。普通に殺人犯だって。
Before examining the encounter any further, one important question must first be addressed. Is the lone man at Eno Park the real Yoshioka Masaya? That at least appears to be the present prevailing view among Japanese internet users. The notion that an unrelated individual would precisely memorize the details of a years-old murder case, only to wander through Ueno Park, impersonating the killer for no apparent reason other than to approach random pedestrians and frighten them is, albeit possible, highly improbable. Thus far, we have yet to find a single comment expressing doubt that this was the real Yoshioka Masaya. Hence, in the hours that followed, Komachi's livestream rapidly gained traction across Japan as a streamer's encounter with a real murderer. As clips from the broadcast circulated online, internet users began scrutinizing the footage and shared their reactions to what they had just seen. As Helen and I examined the hundreds of comments left across various platforms, we were able to identify two clear themes. The first category of comments focused on how sinister the man appeared, the way that the man habitually wiggled his head side to side, the fact that he acted unpredictably, such as the sudden yelling towards the streamer to listen to him, led some viewers to feel that he might run after the streamer at any moment. Yoshioka's entire presence, some argued, was inherently fear-inducing, and for good reasons. This is a man who casually recounts how he killed his mother and left her corpse abandoned for months, then nonchalantly talks about baseball and how it is the national pride of Japan. The second category of comments centered on how a cold-blooded murderer like Yoshioka Masaya received only a 6-year prison sentence. After all, even his own lawyer had advised him to expect a sentence of roughly 12 to 13 years.
弁護士からも言われたんだけど、そうね、 12、3年行くだろうねって言われてたんだし。
And Yoshioka himself believed that he would spend at least a decade behind bars.
俺もまあ10年以上はまあ行くだろうなと思ったんだけど、まあ6年で済んだね。
As an explanation for his short prison sentence, he said that it was because of his mental state, the country, and various other reasons.
あれだろうね、精神科でもそうだけど、まあ、国家とか国とかのそうね、いろいろまあ配慮があったのかな。それでまあ刑期6年で済んだんだけど、そこはありがたいのかありがたくないのかわかんねえけど。
To briefly elaborate on what he meant by his mental state and his country, in his case Japan, allowing him to receive a lenient prison sentence. Under Japan's criminal code, Article 39, acts committed by a person in a state of insanity are not punishable. If the offender was in a state of diminished mental capacity, the punishment shall be reduced. The former refers to a state known as shinshin soshitsu, or legal insanity, in which an individual is deemed to have completely lacked criminal responsibility at the time of the offense. The latter refers to a state known as shinshin kojaku, or diminished mental capacity, in which an individual's criminal responsibility is considered substantially impaired, but not entirely absent. And as Yoshioka claimed that his mental state was one of the reasons for his short sentence, it is possible that the court found him to be in a state of shinshin kojaku, or diminished mental capacity, at the time of the crime. If so, Japanese law would have required the court to reduce his sentence on the grounds that his criminal responsibility was substantially impaired. However, without full access to the court's reasoning or psychiatric evaluations, it is difficult to know precisely how much weight this factor carried in his sentencing. An official court record that we do possess regarding Yoshioka's 2020 ruling shows that the judge acknowledged the alleged neglect in which Yoshioka suffered during his childhood, as well as the alleged verbal abuse that he endured from his mother after they began living together, as mitigating factors. However, it should also be noted that Yoshioka refused to work after graduating from high school, continued to live as a hikikomori, or homebound recluse, and relied exclusively on his mother for financial support until he was 23 years old. Japan is, in many ways, rightfully considered as one of the safest countries in the world, but that reputation should not be mistaken for meaning that every corner of the country is safe, especially after dark. After all, the events on the night of April 20th serve as a firm reminder that even in countries with exceptionally low crime rates, a convicted murderer fresh out of prison may be standing only a few steps away, entirely unbeknownst to you. And if you ever happen to encounter Yoshioka Masaya in Ueno Park during your trip to Japan, or in any other public park around Tokyo, and he begins demanding that you listen to him, it may be wise to follow Komachi's example. Keep your distance from him and try not to provoke him in any way. Given his history, there's no telling what his next action might be.